Okay, welcome to you all. Thank you for being here. I'm Dr. Veronica Watson. I'm the convener of the Frederick Douglass Institute Collaborative, one of the folks who's helped bring this series of conversations to you, and we really appreciate you being here this evening. There may be others who are joining us, so we'll admit those as they come in, but I'm going to turn this over to our two facilitators for the evening to get us started, and that would be Maisha Carter and Zuri Redmond.
Good evening and welcome everyone. So glad that you all could join us this evening. I am Maisha Carter. I am a third year doctoral candidate at IUP in the Administration and Leadership Studies program. And I am so honored to be able to be one of your facilitators tonight and a part of this project as for me, representation matters no matter which way you slice it. And with this project, mentorship and community are two very big things for me. And so at the intersections of those, this project allows me to bring both of those together in a culturally affirming way. And I'll have Zuri introduce herself to you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Zori Redmond. I'm a senior at East Stroudsburg University. While at East Stroudsburg, I've done a plethora of things for people of color. I've been a part of the Black Student Union and a couple other clubs and organizations, but I was the president of the Black Student Union this past summer and fall semester. And with that, I've helped to push ESU in the right direction when dealing with students of color and the different initiatives that we want to see on our campus and the changes that we wish to see throughout PASHE. So being a part of FDI is a pleasure myself. I just love just listening to all the town halls, and I'm very excited to hear the discussions we will have with the panelists tonight.
And we have two other facilitators joining us tonight, Nedrick Patrick and Professor Rachel DeSoto Jackson. And I will allow them to introduce themselves to you if they are open and available.
Hi, I'm Nedrick Patrick. I'm a PhD candidate in the LNC program at IUP. I'm interested in this program because diversity matters and community matters.
Rachel?
Always hard to find the mute button when you have several screens open. Hi, everyone. I am Rachel DeSoto Jackson. I am a professor at IUP, and the area of my work is primarily in community-based theater and performance, social justice theater and performance. And I work a lot with Latinx communities, with Latinx students, and working on really topics that are related to identity and the performance of identity.
Okay, so I think that's me. So once again, I just wanted to welcome you once again, Dr. Veronica Watson. I am a professor of English at IUP, and I am the convener of the Frederick Douglass Institute Collaborative. My role this evening is simply to tell you how we came to be here. And it's so exciting to be able to share this with you. The Frederick Douglass Collaborative has been in existence at IUP and across the PASHE system for 22 years. And our mission is to work with first generation low income and students of color to deliver high impact opportunities, educational opportunities. And when we were all face to face, we were doing that largely through group gatherings, right? So we had a conference, we had a debate tournament that we ran every year. And of course, as a result of the pandemic, we had to pivot like everyone else did and really begin to think about how to meet students where they are in a virtual environment. At the same time, there were a couple of other organizations that were making that same move, that same pivot. And I have known the director of the National Association for Faith and Justice for a number of years. She and I had the opportunity to work together on a previous project with the collaborative and NAFJ. And they have a mentoring program that's called Pen or Pencil. And Pen and Pencil across the country has mentoring sites, and many of those mentoring sites, once again, were meeting face to face to do things with mentors and the students they were working with. And so the NAFJ was in the process of pivoting. And at the same time, the 400 Years of African American History Commission was in the process of rolling out a series of initiatives that were really meant to highlight, celebrate, and acknowledge the long and deep history that African American and African descended people have in this country and the many contributions that we've made. One of the initiatives that they were in the process of supporting was the Pen or Pencil Project. So we partnered with the 400 Years of African American History Commission to really create a series of supports that mentoring sites can use. And so that's the reason that this event is being recorded this evening, because this will be packaged, it will be made available almost like a video library. So all of these town halls are resources that those mentoring sites are able to download and use at their leisure at a later time. So we really, really appreciate you being here and participating in this work. Your presence here in the conversation that we have will enable people around the country to engage some of these same ideas and participate virtually at a later time in these events. So that's all I have to offer to you other than a hearty welcome and thank you for being here.
All right, so I get to tell you about how we're going to engage in this wonderful virtual space. So in just a moment, you are going to be introduced to our fantastic panelists for the evening. And so we're going to get to hear from these fantastic panelists. And as you're listening to the panelists, feel free to go ahead and write any questions that you have as you're listening right into the chat. We don't want you to save them for the end. We want you to write them as they come up because we don't want you to forget about them. Now, we're not going to address them right in the moment, but we are going to capture them. So at the very end, we'll go back to those questions in order to capture some of those thoughts that you had as you were listening to the presentation. Now, one of the great things about virtual engagement is we have wonderful tools that we can use in order to engage with our audiences. So today we have two technologies that we're going to use. One is going to be a poll, which we'll get to in a moment. And we also have another tool of engagement where you're going to actually get to play a role. And we'll tell you more about that a little bit later. So just letting you know that there's going to be two different digital engagements that you're going to engage with today. So in just a moment, again, we're going to have our panelists. Feel free to chat your questions into the chat box. And at the very end, we will have our Q&A.
Actually, maybe even before those introductions, how about we go ahead and launch that poll? And that way people can take that. We'll have those results back by the time that Dr. Jones and Satchel have completed their presentations.
Okay, turn that over to you, Veronica, to launch the poll.
Thank you. All right. I do believe all of you should see a poll, 3 short questions. Record those, and a little bit later in our presentation, we'll share some of those results out. And our panelists can feel free to participate in the poll also. It's anonymous, so we don't know who said what. Okay, just past halfway point. We'll give it another 30 seconds or so to record your responses. All right, almost there. Another 10 seconds. If you want to get in, now's your chance. And done. Thank you. We'll share those results in just a bit.
Okay, so now it is time to hear from our panelists. Today we have Dr. Chanel A. Jones and Satchel Walton. Those are our two panelists for tonight. I'm going to start off by formally introducing Dr. Jones. Dr. Jones is the Assistant Dean of Community Engagement at Franklin University. She also serves as chair of the Public Safety Programs. Dr. Jones received her PhD at the Administration of Justice from Texas Southern University in Houston, Texas. Her research interests include race and crime, policing, and juvenile delinquency. She is particularly interested in issues of police-community relations, disproportionate minority contact, DMC, mass incarceration, and the intersection of race and gender in the criminal justice system. Dr. Jones currently serves as the National Director of Research for the Teen and Police Services, TAPS, Academy, a federally funded program designed to reduce social distance between police officers and youth. With that being said, I'm going to now introduce Dr. Jones.
Hello, everybody. I didn't know if you were going to go ahead and introduce Satchel, so that's why I paused. So should I go ahead and start presenting?
Yes, I'm going to read Satchel's before he presents.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So hi, everybody. Let me get my screen up here so you all can see it. And while I'm doing this, I want to take the time to say thank you to Dr. Watson. Thank you to for inviting me to participate. Thank you to Bernice Robinson, who I believe is on the call as well, who helped to facilitate the connection with me in the 400 years of African American History Commission. And then that's how I got to meet Dr. Watson. It was like a whole circle of life situation going on. But I'm definitely thrilled to be here. So I'm going to take probably the 15 minutes. I tried to get it short, and I know people love short and sweet during presentations, but there's so much information to share. I was asked to tackle a couple of things today. My work that I do in terms of building relationship between teens and the police and the TAPS program, a little bit about what is going on just within our community overall, and then ways to improve police training. So there were a couple of different tracks that I'm going to try to tackle all once. So let's go ahead and start. So this topic is the miseducation of the police. And I wondered if everybody on this call has actually taken the time to think about the word miseducation. And so if you have, there is a chat box here, and I want you to just type, what do you think it means, the term miseducation actually means? What does that mean to you? We're gonna get some group participation here today. So I'll take a few seconds to let you all do that, and we'll get to it. See what all of the incorrect training received. Thank you, Bernice. To me, it means the teaching was not accurate or correct. Good job, Alexi. So we'll see if anybody else puts anything else on there. I'm going to go ahead and move on to actually give you what the definition is. So Alexi was right. So miseducation, improper or an imperfect or a poor education. If we were to take the word and use it as a verb, that's miseducate, that's the action of doing. It is to educate someone in a poor, improper, or a harmful manner. And when we think about the miseducation of police, there can be some pretty dire consequences that occur. And so what you see here is actually a picture from a demonstration, a women's demonstration that I had organized this summer. We gathered about 3,000 women to march in solidarity with Black men who had been shot by the police, as well as Black women who have been shot or, victims of excessive force and violence, and to advocate for change. So miseducation leads to a lot of things. And so that's what I want to talk about. When we think about miseducation of police, it encompasses several different things: the lack of training hours, the lack of quality training, and the lack of training assessment. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in detail, but what I mean specifically is, if you look at that chart on your screen, the average number of hours it takes to become an attorney, right? 4,700 hours. Go down to a nurse is about 4,500 hours. Go down to a plumber, you're about 3,500 hours. You even go to a cosmetologist, you're at about 3,000 hours of training. Compare that to a police officer. On average in the United States, officer training in their field or their basic training academies, they range anywhere from 648 to about 840 hours. So when we're talking about the lack of training hours, there is definitely an opportunity for improvement. So miseducation, the limited training hours, but it's not just lack of training hours that we need to assess. It's also the quality of the training that officers are receiving. Oftentimes when officers go into trainings, either in service when they're in their basic academy or even in their field training, they sit in a room, they listen to somebody, they sign their name on a paper that simply says that they were there. And that brings me to bullet point number 3 on this slide, is that there is oftentimes a lack of training assessment. Understanding what competencies are learned, whether or not officers know how to apply them and articulate them when the time comes for them to demonstrate that. So that is part of this miseducation that we are seeing in law enforcement agencies across the country. So when we think about miseducation, what does that lead to? Well, of course, it leads to reduced public trust. It leads to strained police community relations. It leads to an increase in officer complaints, because if they don't know how to respond appropriately to a situation, then that opens the door for somebody to write a file a complaint on them. It also leads to officer misconduct. And then most importantly, we get to issues of excessive force, issues of brutality, even fatalities, which evolve from officer-involved shootings. And all of that compromises, it hinders public safety. All of these things are related. And so there needs to be more education, better education, and an assessment of that education. Because what happens is we are currently living in a situation across the United States, in many departments across the United States, of officers being miseducated. It's reduced, it's inaccurate, it's improper, and it leads to all of these other situations. This is what else miseducation leads to. These are situations, I'm from Columbus, Ohio. All of these images are from Columbus, Ohio this summer. When you have miseducation, then you have an increased opportunity for brutality, excessive force, or officer-involved shootings. You also get situations where that first picture there, that's Congresswoman Joyce Beatty's back. She was pepper sprayed by police officers who did not know how to appropriately respond to peaceful demonstrators. The other guy pointing his hand, that is our council president, Shannon Hardin, who was also pepper sprayed by police officers. And then the guy that is holding Congresswoman Beatty, that is our Franklin County Commissioner, Kevin Boyce. And if you see that officer is directly spraying that young lady who's trying to hand some water to the people that were sprayed. So it leads to contention between the police and the public. We saw the demonstrations where people were, messing up property, vandalizing property, breaking out windows. You saw people marching, but all of that is the result of miseducation. You improve the education of the police officer, you significantly reduce the opportunity for situations like this that you're seeing on your screen to happen. So when I do my work, I think about how we can strengthen police training. And so knowing that you know, and knowing that you got about 20 seconds to answer this question, I want you to write in that chat box, how can we strengthen police training. What needs to be done? What do you think needs to be done in your respective area of expertise, what you've seen so far and what you've heard, seeing that I've only been talking for maybe like 5 minutes now. I'll see what everybody puts in this box. Hearing from the community, exactly. Offering the community perspective and letting them have voice. The issue, accountability, I'm going to talk about that as well. And that gets into some discussion about the FOP contract. I completely and wholeheartedly agree. Hearing from victims and or survivors, right? Because their experience can lend into areas of opportunity for improving the system of interaction between police and communities. I see diversity training, de-escalation, accountability, yearly reviews, all those very, very good. I see somebody that says evaluate training, absolutely. Offer more extensive training on victims' rights. Yes, needs to be a significant level of empathy. Great point. I'm going to talk about that too, because officer empathy is critical, and what happened training from police departments, 20, 30 years ago is not the type of training that officers need currently. So excellent responses, everybody. So I kind of tried to summarize it as quickly as I can here on the slide that's in front of you. So first thing is foremost is that there currently is not a federal mandate or requirement for the number of training hours for the police departments across the United States. That authority resides with each individual state. And so as a result, there are currently 37 states that do not require officers to be trained prior to them becoming a police officer. So basically, they can be a police officer, they can have arrest powers, they can have detaining powers, they can have use of force powers and all of that without ever having to step into a police academy. Why? Because at the federal level, there is no requirement for the number of hours that officers have to train. And that's why we also see significant variations in the training requirements from state to state. I talked about improving the quality of police training, making it something more than just going into a room, listening to a lecture and then signing the name that demonstrates that you were there. Another is assessing the recruit's knowledge of the information obtained during the training, but also seeing how they apply it. That includes creating scenario-based training, using virtual reality trainings where they are immersed in the situation and they have to apply the lessons and the trainings that are learned to an actual virtual reality situation, and then putting in actual scenario-based situations also. There was a comment in the chat that talked about diversity training and making, I think, yearly reviews, and all that is great. I definitely support that. But what needs to happen is racial equity assessments and implicit bias trainings at every stage of the training. So it is not just a block of a 2-hour training that officers come in. It is consistently woven throughout every aspect of the training. So officers understand how they may react to a situation, how their biases may influence the way that they react, and then they can adjust their response accordingly. There is a significant lack of mental health CIT, which is crisis intervention training, and youth interaction training with all departments across the United States. So increasing that, and that goes into the next bullet point, which focuses on tactics. Right now, it is lopsided. Officers receive most of their academy training on tactics, firearms, and defense mechanisms. They don't receive a lot of training on interacting with youth, understanding mental health crises and how to appropriately deal with that, recognizing what are resources in the community, when to call in an expert to help. Many departments don't even have mobile crisis units where they partner with the social worker and send the social worker out with the police to respond. So all of those together will improve police training. The other is scenarios, the videos, the contents. I have sat in several police trainings across the country because I like to assess them. I like to see what they learn. And one of the things that I have noticed is that in trainings, the quote unquote bad guy is usually always a Black person. And it's usually always a male. And so when I say diversify, I mean diversify who is the example, who's going to be the target where they're shooting at when they're trying to qualify, because there is a difference between training and indoctrination. And so we don't want to indoctrinate officers to perceive a bad person as a Black male or a Black woman. They need to have different scenarios with different people so that they understand everybody can be perceived as a threat. So increasing officer wellness training right now, that is a limitation in training. The big thing that I've been pushing for all departments across the country is to create some sort of community immersions, because many police officers don't actually live in the community that they police. They live in a rural area or suburban area. They come into the inner cities and they occupy that space rather than enforce and build relationships with the community. Partner with universities, particularly policing scholars, justice scholars, people who are well versed on this issue so they know how to develop actual training for adult learners, because that is different from a college student and a high school student. So there needs to be a better understanding of that. But then also include evaluative mechanisms so that can be the training can be evaluated and assessed and strengthened as they go along. And then understanding what community resources are. I know that was a lot, but I wanted to give that to you all. So how have I addressed a lot of the stuff that I've talked about just now? Back in 2012, we created this program, the Teen and Police Service Academy. As you can see, that's one of our graduations. And I always love showing this picture because in this picture, there are a bunch of middle school kids. You see them all sticking their tongues out and making these silly faces and everything, but they have their TAP shirts on, they have their medals, but also in this picture, there are patrol officers, there are police sergeants, there are police lieutenants, there is a judge in this picture, there is a coordinator of the TAPS program, there is the director of public safety in this picture, there's also me, the academic researcher. All of us came together to create this TAPS program. So when we talk about improving police community relations and doing programs that work, it's not going to be built in a silo if you want it to be effective. You need to collaborate across many departments, many agencies, and many people to make something work. And this is in collaboration with our largest school system in Ohio, which is Columbus City Schools. So what we do is we go into the schools, we pair police officers with kids, and the officers serve as mentors to the kids. Over a course of 11 weeks, they meet every single week. They follow a set curriculum, a set structure of the program. There's a lesson, there's a breakout session with the officer mentors. The groups come back in a reflective section. And then at the end of it, there is a graduation that culminates everybody for successfully completing the program. We do this in Houston, in Galveston, in Columbus, in Tuscaloosa. We do it in St. Kitts. We do it in other places in the Caribbean. We've had it in Chicago. Most of your major cities across the country, we have implemented a TAPS program. And what I will say about TAPS is that the program works because we're collaborative in nature. It was started by Dr. Everett Penn, who is a researcher out of University of Houston, Clear Lake, a former chief of police or assistant chief, Brian Lumpkin out of Houston Police Department. Myself, I came in as the researcher, and we had built this to expand it to different agencies. And one of the things that work is the officer training. So we don't put officers in a 1-hour training. We don't put them in a 2-hour training. Our officers go through a very intensive 2-day training. So that's about 16 hours. And they learn everything from the teen brain, interacting with kids, de-escalation, understanding why kids make the decisions. And then we put them through a series of scenario-based trainings where they're actually, dealing with situations that a teenager might face at the time and how they need to handle that situation. And when it is time for a school administrator to come in, our officers do not do enforcement actions while they are participating in the TAPS program. And that is one of the pillars of our program. We are not enforcers. We are building bridges. We're reducing social distance between teens and the police. And as you can see right here, we've graduated thousands of students at this point. The picture down at the bottom is Officer Sergeant Lindsay Ally, who she's meeting with her group, and instead of meeting at the table, she decided to sit down on the floor. This is pre-COVID, so we've been doing this virtual, so now their breakout sessions look like this, but this was pre-COVID. And if you see that picture where they're petting the therapy dog, that was at Sherwood Middle School. And what happened the day before, this was the first day we started TAPS there. The day before, one of their students was shot dead. As a matter of fact, she was standing outside and the student died. So many of the students were grieving that day. And so we knew we had to start TAPS at the school. And so instead of doing the traditional welcome introduction that we typically do, we brought in the therapy dog unit. And so that session turned into a session for students to talk about their emotions, the stages of grief, how they're coping with it. We gave them tools. We had therapists and counselors in. And so we really do try to bridge that gap and show that officers do more than simply enforce. But the other part about TAPS is our officers are learning just as much from the kids as the kids are learning from the officers. We specifically built this around a reciprocal relationship between teens and the police. So that's a little bit about how I'm addressing TAPS. How we built it, the type of training. We assess all of our officers. They get evaluations at the pre-test and the post-test. We constantly are tweaking it for improvement. I always get feedback on how they could have perhaps better responded to a situation, handled a situation, and we do that in real time as they go. Now that we've been virtual, we record all of the sessions, we play them back so the officers could understand the dialogue and see where there are areas of opportunity for improvement. And so that's where we are with it. COVID has required us to pivot a little bit, but we're still tooting right on along. And so when you think about additional ways to improve policing in America, I have some things up here. Ending qualified immunity. Right now, many officers, there is no accountability for when there is an egregious act. And part of that is because they're currently under qualified immunity. So ending that, we're going to talk more about establishing a civilian review board, but it is not just simply to establish the civilian review board. We don't want is to simply sign off and vote something in. Civilian review boards, they need power. They need investigatory power. They need the power to make decisions, and then those decisions to be upheld. And if it's not upheld, then there needs to be some reason as to why that decision was not upheld. So I call it making a civilian review board with teeth, giving them teeth. The other is identifying what the FOP contract, for a lot of you who don't know, that is the union contract that governs most of the decision making and the behaviors of police officers. Understanding what provisions are in that. And when I talk about provisions, I mean, how long can an officer complaint stay in their file? When is that removed? Who is eligible for promotion? When there is an officer involved shooting, what type of information is that officer privy to that they can read prior to even making a statement about the situation that has been held? And understanding what would happen with an officer if there's an officer involved shooting, they're terminated by somebody, then how they can get their job back if they go through arbitration. All of that is in the FOP contract. Incentivizing residency, I talked about it earlier. Many police officers don't live in the city that they police, so they just come into police and then they go out. So my thing is proximity brings people closer together, so incentivizing that. Establishing community immersion training. And then the last one is incorporating some form of liability insurance. So that way, when there is an officer involved shooting or somebody sues the city or the county for a behavior of an officer, the officer is then liable, not the city, and our taxpayer dollars are taken up for that. So I know that was a lot. I tried to group it all in a short amount of time. And I think we're going to have questions at the end, so I'll hold off on taking questions from you all, but that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. And now we're going to introduce Satchel Walton. Satchel Walton is a student journalist at DuPont Manual High School in Louisville. He co-wrote a series for the Manual Red Eye exposing hate speech and symbols in Kentucky law enforcement that led to the commissioner of Kentucky State Police resigning. He is the co-founder of the Kentucky Green Report, a local environmental news site, and has had works published in the Louisville Courier Journal, BuzzFeed News, and Journalism Education Today magazine. Satchel Walton.
Yes, thank you. I'm not as qualified to be here necessarily and to talk on this topic, but I have over the last 4 or 5 months been doing a lot of work on police trainings here in Kentucky that exposed one particularly egregious example of mistrainings, though by no means the only one. And so I will share this PowerPoint. Okay, so how this story got started was in no way by me being the most intrepid journalist in the world. I'm not. What happened was my dad's a lawyer, and someone at his firm was working on a case about a police shooting in Appalachia in Eastern Kentucky involving the Kentucky State Police, and through discovery got a hold of a PowerPoint from the Kentucky State Police that was pretty shocking because it quoted Hitler. And they sent this to multiple professional news outlets. And I couldn't tell you why, quite frankly, but those professional news outlets were not interested in the story. And so when my brother and I had learned that there was a Kentucky State Police training floating around that was quoting Hitler that hadn't been exposed, we thought it needed to be out there as soon as possible. We thought we could do it well. And so we said, I can do that. And volunteered to take it on if the professional outlets weren't going to. We're in the journalism and communications program at our high school in Louisville. So we wrote an article about this training. It was from 2013. It wasn't that we knew currently in use. So we did open records requests and tried to get comment from the Kentucky State Police. And they weren't answering anything, even when they were legally liable to answer open records requests. They just don't. Our open records laws in Kentucky are strong in what they're supposed to do, but don't have any method of enforcement to make them. But we had this slideshow still, and so right here, Adolf Hitler is a little hard to see. It's the second one from the bottom there. The second quote under belief. Says, and I can fight only for something that I love only what I respect, and respect only what I at least know. Adolf Hitler. And then it links to his Goodreads page in case you want to go see some more quotes and books from Adolf Hitler. So this training was used in the training academy for the Kentucky State Police in 2013. And as we discovered, even for a few years before that, to train every state police officer in Kentucky graduating in those years. And there were about 60 people graduate from the Kentucky State Police Academy every year, and there were Hitler quotes in 3 years of presentations, and that's 180 people who graduated who did not speak up when there were quotes like this from Hitler in the presentation. And somehow the person making it thought that was acceptable, and the people approving this slideshow to be charitable, maybe they didn't notice, but or they tacitly approved. It was certainly something that the person making this slideshow thought was acceptable within the culture of the Kentucky State Police, because we got another Hitler quote here at the bottom, and this one, I mean, that's fascism right there. Essentially, the very first essential for success is a perpetually constant and regular employment of violence. And don't miss the irony of quoting Hitler right next to Albert Einstein, who fled Germany before the Holocaust. But and then here too, Hitler quote number 3, and this same presentation. And then we shouldn't let this overshadow the fact that they also quoted Robert E. Lee approvingly, Confederate general, and we've got the thin gray line up top. That's their motto, because they wear gray. But also you got to think, are they analogizing themselves to the Confederacy here? They weren't founded as a slave patrol, but are Are they analogizing themselves to the Confederacy? Because we've got a thin gray line, gray being the color of the Confederacy, and then pictures of the Kentucky State Police with looking like all white people on past and present here, black and white photo and the color one. And then a big old quote from Robert E. Lee. So this was the stuff we were working with that were in the presentations, and wrote an article about this and published it, that then went up through the local media and got quotes from the governor and attorney general in Kentucky, and then even got some attention from the national media. It was in the New York Times and the Washington Post, and then it was quite a big story. And when right after we published it in late October, right before the election. And so this just goes to show as an example of the culture we've got in some police departments, where they thought that it was somehow acceptable, then that the people in the department would accept it if they had presentations quoting Hitler. And obviously they were right. When we requested, send an open record request for any complaints about this slideshow or about the fellow who put it together, they said there were no complaints, even though 180 people around about saw presentations quoting Hitler. Even more, saw presentations quoting Robert E. Lee. Robert E. Lee quote was in there for about 10 years that we know of. And so, lost my train of thought, but this article got attention from the media and led to the longtime commissioner of the Kentucky State Police, Rodney Brewer, who had been the commissioner of the Kentucky State Police for about 7 or 8 years under a past governor administration, and then was reappointed when our current governor, Andy Beshear, became governor in late 2019. He was not fired, he was forced to resign. And then there have been other consequences of it. The Anti-Defamation League is offering Holocaust training to top officers in the Kentucky State Police. And then after we wrote this article, we got a tip from someone within law enforcement, the Kentucky Department of Criminal Justice Trainings, which trains officers at local departments, smaller departments, and about how they had used a video with a Nazi symbol in it, and that was cut from a larger video about how that talked about how Jews ran the drug trade and how all sorts of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. So we wrote an article about that one too, and they removed that training. And it just goes to show that I'm in no way an expert on police trainings, but I think this can serve as further evidence that there is a culture within some police forces that will accept explicit hatred and bigotry, in quotes from someone like Adolf Hitler, that no one spoke up about this who saw it until, and 180 people saw quotes from Hitler in a presentation and didn't complain about it, maybe some people dropped out of training and didn't say anything, but we'll never know, because this was in 2013 and wasn't exposed when Hitler quotes were being used in presentations for years. So sorry if I'm repeating myself a little bit, but that's about the experience there. And especially this is coming in the context in Kentucky. We've had in Louisville, we had lots of protests and wide community discussion over the last year about policing reform, because Breonna Taylor was killed by the Louisville Metro Police Department in Louisville a little more than a year ago today. And so I think this goes to show that there is certainly some culture within some law enforcement departments that's explicitly accepting of hatred. That's about all I have to say. Do we have any, what's our next section? Is questions?
Thank you both. Thank you. So that's a lot of food for thought, and helps us to pivot into the next part. So we're going to actually hold off on Q&A for just a moment, but you all have really kind of set the stage for what we'd like to begin to discuss. I want to take us back to our poll results, if possible. I believe that most of our poll results revealed that many of us have some familiarity with community review boards, but have not exactly had the opportunity to serve on any. But by and large, most of us agree that community review boards have earned a role in reviewing policing policy. Our panelists have certainly done their diligence with introducing and orienting us to community review boards and their power. So right now, we want to invite you to switch roles for just a moment through an interactive case study. But before we review the case study, I certainly want to caution you around the content in the upcoming case study. The upcoming case study does contain material of a sensitive nature. And so we invite you to decide how you would like to participate moving forward. Next slide, please. All right. So our case study explores an officer has shot an unarmed citizen of color, resulting in the death of that citizen. Cell phone footage of the shooting has been circulating all over social media. The community has been protesting and calling for this officer to be fired. And the victim's family has filed a complaint. The officer has been on duty for about 5 years, and she is asserting that she responded appropriately and has been trained on what she was trained to do. And there's body camera footage of the shooting, but department policy is that it's not to be released until after the department investigation has been completed. Officer-involved shootings are investigated by an internal affairs unit within the department where the officer is employed. A community oversight board that is staffed by 2 citizen volunteers, 1 retired police officer, 1 mayoral appointee will review the investigation results. The oversight board has no authority to conduct investigations of its own. Hearings of the Community Oversight Board are closed, but their findings are shared with the public. Disciplinary recommendations and action, if any, are not shared with the public. And so what we would like for you to do in this next activity is, like I said, we want you to switch roles for a moment, and we want you to envision and position yourself as one of the participants on this community oversight board, given the details of the case study. And through just thinking about what decisions, what recommendations on policy that you would offer up, we want you to be able to participate either through the chat, or through another interactive tool that we're going to be sharing in just a moment, called Padlet. Some of you may be familiar with it. I'm going to drop the link in the chat. Just a second. Here we go. Sorry. Let's see. That wasn't. Got to switch over to everybody so that everybody sees this. Hang on one moment.
So while Maisha is getting that set up, just to recap what's going to be happening here is you're going to get a link that's in the chat right now, and we're going to invite you to click on that link, and it's going to take you to an external site. And on this site, you're going to get to type your responses as if you were on this review board. Are you all ready to continue the instructions, Maisha?
I'm ready. All right.
All right.
So the link is in the chat. And once you're over there, you should see like a map. And it will say at the top, there's a title that says Community and Citizen Review Board Recommendations. And as Rachel just oriented you and just gave you beautiful instructions, you are going to share on the Padlet, type in what your recommendation would be based on the details of this particular case study. What would you offer offer up for policy? And you can share it on the Padlet, or you Padlet, or you can share it in the chat, whichever your preference is.
We do ask if you're going to share it in the chat to not hit enter right away. So let's give everyone a chance to get their ideas recorded. And if you're on Padlet, you're going to click that blue, I'm sorry, it's not blue, it's red, a red plus sign down on the bottom right-hand side. And it's going to pop up a little thing that looks like a Post-it note for you. Only you will be able to see what you're typing until after you post it. So if everyone can choose their way of interacting there, if you're a pen and paper person, you can even write your response on a piece of paper, and when we're ready, you can just hold it up. So 3 different ways to engage, but what thoughts do you have about the case that's before you? If you're a community review board, what feedback or suggestions might you offer about that process? So we'll give you a minute, maybe 2, to get your thoughts recorded. Once again, if you're recording something in chat, don't hit the enter right away. Let's give everyone a chance to get something recorded.
Wonderful. We see some, you may see an update button right at the top of your Padlet to actually post it.
I'm going to go with a musical interlude. Another minute or so.
Okay, and anyone who decided to participate via the chat, if you are ready to enter your responses and contributions, you may do so now. Wonderful. Thank you all. All right, so what we would like to do now is we'd like to review some of the contributions that everyone has shared with our space, within our space today. And I would like to pull Dr. Jones and even Satchel back in to review some of the contributions of our audience so that we can have a discussion about how these contributions may contribute or may fit into the context of a community review board based on your experience. All right.
While our presenters are looking over the post-its there on Padlet, as well as the comments in the chat, I just want to offer a way of opening up our conversation to say that the first thing that occurred to me is, Satchel, you have nothing to apologize for. I mean, the work that you've done has been so amazing, and it really shows the power of citizenship, right? That if you hadn't taken it up, it likely wouldn't have become part of anyone's conversation. And so, just really thinking about both what a review board might do in a more formal way, but also the responsibility of individuals as citizens to really pay attention to what we're using to train our civil servants with, I think is an important takeaway for me.
I absolutely agree. And these are some very good responses here on the case study. It seems like we're getting them into a couple of buckets, with two saying that there should be a protest, a couple talking about the transparency of the board. It needs to be, a transparent board. And then I saw one that said somebody needs to take the police officer should be placed on leave. I can't find that now. Maybe that was in the chat box. Oh yes, that was in the chat box. So now I think all of these are great responses to the situation. One of the things that we know with oversight boards is some cities, some municipalities and counties, they create oversight boards, just to say that they have created an oversight board. And a key element of an oversight board is to afford that board the opportunity to conduct investigations. So if there is no investigatory powers within the board, and then there are no transparency on the hearings, it's nothing more than lip service, right? There's no point of that board. And so I think that is a key element here. And definitely, I think we would probably need some more information in terms of body cam footage, any footage from bystanders, getting a report from the coroners. I'd be interested to see the trajectory of the bullets, where they entered, where they exited, or if they're still there, the context of the situation. And then definitely not just suspending the officer, because officers are suspended all the time, but it is that element, I think, that was mentioned in the chat of suspending without pay. I think that's key, because oftentimes when there is a police involved shooting, it's mandatory that the officer is placed on leave. It's not mandatory that they're placed on leave without pay. I would add one more thing to that, I would hope that the officer would have a required drug screen, because oftentimes when there are police involved shootings, the officers are not mandated to go to a drug screen. Whereas if you were to work on any other job and something happened, they would tell you right then and there, stop what you're doing, go right on over, take a drug test. And so that's some of my feedback, but I think these are all great comments.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Jones. That actually takes me to I have a question, or opening up the stage for questions. You're speaking to just sort of this performative nature of many of the districts and counties and such. So what would you recommend in terms of the power of a review board to kind of move past this sort of performative kind of stance, so that there's actual, so that they move the work, and so that there's action that really follows up behind, and really sort of take on that sort of what you mentioned, the investigatory power that you emphasize as being very critical to the core of a body like this?
Yeah, so I would direct everybody on this call to check out NACOLE, NACOLE.org. It's the National Association of Civilian Oversight and Law Enforcement or something like that. They have a long title. But they provide several different models for police oversight boards or civilian review boards. And in order to change the powers of a police oversight board, it actually depends on how that board was established, right? So if it was something that was established in the charter of a municipality, then you would have to take that to a vote. So then you would need to put that on the ballot. And so we would call that a ballot initiative. You would need to get a certain amount of signatures to make those changes and put it on there. I would also say write to your elected officials. So if you have a city council, if you have a mayor, county commissioners, and if they established it just through like an executive order or just, something that the city council, because they pass all kinds of things, all the time, then if there needs to be a revision, then they can do that on a whim, but you have to figure out how that was, how it was established too. And so I think understanding how the board was established can then inform how you change it if there aren't investigatory powers with the board. So I think that's a critical piece of it. But oftentimes, civilian review boards are established through a charter element, or they're established through some kind of a legislative effort. And so in order to change that legislative effort, it has to go to the ballot. So it's just incumbent on everybody to know what your laws are and then what that getting a ballot issue process looks like for your particular area.
Thank you for that. If there are other questions that the audience has, we'll take them. You can unmute yourself or you can drop it in the chat so that we can continue to learn from our dynamic panelists. They have so much to offer.
This is Anyanu Cox. This is just really kind of a comment. I took decided to go back and review a little bit on the history of police, in America, with the work of Dr. Joy DeGruy. You know her. She's a PhD researcher, social worker, psychologist, and there was also a policeman, also a PhD researcher who had been a policeman for a lot of years. And but anyway, one of the things they found went along with what Satchel had talked about, is that the very beginning and the birth of police in this nation really was around what Satchel was talking about. And so I really like what you both are doing. I like the fact, Chanel, that I think most of all, what's built in, what's already baked into the system is that FOP you mentioned. Is that what it's called? Yeah, I think that almost could be a box 10 times bigger than the rest of them, because according to them, it's really the birth of it led to well, it started out, of course, as just basic laws to make sure that African Americans were kept in check, like over 100 years ago. So when they wound up putting this together, it's not even just simply trying to educate individuals, but the whole system is pretty much jacked up, excuse the word. But and of course, with the gray uniforms and all that, man, that was really something. So I think that even with Satchel being the one to bring that forth, I'm not sure if someone else brought all that forth, if it would have been handled the same way. So I think everybody has their lane and what they're in, and I think you're both doing excellent work. They talked about the fact too that I didn't know that even though the police unions are a nonprofit, they're not nonprofit like a 501c3, because 501c3s are their mission is to really look out for the community and citizens. The 5014, I think it is, their job is to take care of those in-house, and so everything they do is for the police, by the police, and really not for the community. So they already baked in their whole intention. And so anyways, you got your hands full, you got youth on your side, and so blessings to you both.
Thank you. And I want to say, because Satchel, in the chat, you brought up a really good point that I didn't touch on either because I was running out of time. But it was about how officers are trained, right? They're the good guy. Everybody else is the bad guy. And then the key word that I always hear in training is you make sure you get home safely. Don't worry about anybody else, but you make sure you get home safely. And you put in there, like, what kind of culture is that when everybody else is perceived as the enemy, right? That's not what policing should be. So I just wanted to highlight that and say that you were right on point with mentioning that in the chat.
Yep, and people are naturally averse to killing others. That's not something many people want to do at all. You have to be trained to do that. And many of the policing theories are designed around how to train officers to be more willing to kill people. And, officers are put in dangerous situations. Sometimes maybe that's something you'd have to do as a very, very last resort. But the way the trainings are happening now, some of them are emphasizing that as the first thing you should be thinking about.
There are a couple of comments and questions that have come up in the chat.
Dorothy has a question. I think there's a question about if one has information regarding lack of reporting on behalf of police when it comes to hate crimes, what's the best process for escalating that when the local elected officials and papers are less than compliant?
Well, I think that the Kentucky State Police, they weren't responsive to our open records requests or our requests for comments until we said we're publishing that article tomorrow at noon. If you want to comment, you're going to email us or call us by then and say what you want to say or not. I think they thought they might be able to get away with it. Maybe we'd give up on the story if they didn't comment on it. We're just student journalists. We couldn't write anything too bad that would get the attention of the governor and everything. But I think showing that the persistence there and that it's going to get done. And Kentucky has strong open records laws, although this session of our state legislature, among other things, they tried to gut some of that, which is unfortunate, as well as saying that passing a bill is saying you can't criticize the police or in a manner that would provoke violent reaction in a reasonable person, although that's an entirely separate conversation, what they're trying to do there. But I think showing the institutions that we're not going to take their word for everything. The first time I emailed them, they said, "Oh yes, we think this was just used one time." And there was just 1 year that we quoted Hitler. And the spokesperson said, "Well, we tried to represent the values of the Kentucky State Police," or something ridiculous like that. And you have to show them and that you're not going to take their word for that when they were actually used 3 years of Hitler quoting and 10 years of Robert E. Lee.
Just add to what Satchel is saying here. So if you have about the lack of reporting of police, I just want to make sure everybody is aware that the FBI collects data. They publish it annually. I believe it's hate crimes in the United States. There's also the UCR, which is a Uniform Crime Report, which has been transitioned into NIBRS, the National Incident-Based Reporting System. And one of the key elements about all of those databases is that just police departments are not required to report. That's another issue with the system. So when we talk about crimes that happen, hate crimes that happen, there's always an undercount because police departments are not mandated to provide that information. They do it voluntarily because they want some kind of way of just tracking things if they so desire. And so if you know of hate crimes that are happening, if you know that they are being underreported, and of course we want to bring all of that stuff to light. I lean to the side of using the media. So, like Satchel wrote his article and whatnot, I would say, get it on your news, write an article. You can even self-publish these days, but figure out some kind of way to put it. Heck, you can even do, 240 character tweet, put it in there, send it out, and watch. Before you know it, it'll probably go viral. And so I think just if you have that information, lean into putting it out there as much as you can using the platforms that are available to you. So that way we can start to bring light and attention to, this information that you have and what's going on.
You bring up I'm sorry, go ahead, Dr. Watson.
Yeah, just a question. The cynic in me, right? So I just want to kind of put this out here. When we make an open records request and we get the information that Satchel has gotten, or if you're working with a policing agency or law enforcement agency and you get wind of something, I guess I found myself wondering, wouldn't they just change it so that it wouldn't be there? They continue to use it. It continues to be part of the culture, but it's not as visible. And so I wonder if there is a role in terms of the citizen review, either boards or commissions or individuals, that goes beyond just what are you using as the materials that are used to train officers, but also kind of gets at some of those questions about, and what values are you trying to impart or to train them into? What is the culture that you're getting into? So it's kind of a windy question there, but I guess the question is, are we sure that it isn't still being used and just it's sort of gone a little bit more underground? And how do we get at that if we think that there's still more to find?
I can start with that then. I doubt that there are still Hitler quotes in the Kentucky State Police trainings, but you're right. You never know. The Kentucky State Police are who are we going to call if they don't answer our open record requests, right? But I think it did show a consequence when the commissioner of the Kentucky State Police had to resign over it. But what was the other point I had? But some of the ideas expressed in that slideshow, and there's more of it that's atrocious and expresses some ideas about being violent, being manly over policy, all that about how you need to be ready to kill at any moment. Those ideas, that killology theory by Dave Grossman, very prominent police trainer, all that's still out there and is being taught. We know that. And that's a theory that's still being trained to police officers today, that they need to be ready and look at everyone as the enemy.
I would just add to it, there's something to be said about doing training audits, which should be happening at the department level for every police department. And if there is not, then that's a whole nother concern. And so when these audits happen, then there should be a thorough assessment of what types of materials are being used. Our Division of Police just went through one as part of an entire, we hired Matrix Consulting to come in, and they worked in hand with me and some other, a group of people. We formed, we were appointed to the Columbus Community Safety Advisory Commission. And so what we did was we went through all the training modules, materials, their hiring process, recruiting process, literally every aspect of the Division of Police that you can possibly think about. And then we issued about 140 recommendations. That was in addition to, and working alongside in tandem with Matrix Consulting, which was the consulting group that came in and also did an internal audit to assess. So the recommendations basically paralleled each other. We identified and uncovered the same things. And so I think there is something to be said about requiring departments to go through that internal audit process. There should be some sort of state board. So I'll use Ohio again. We have OPATA, which is the Ohio Peace Officer Training Academy, which sets the curriculum for all of the police departments throughout the state. But then we also have the Office of Criminal Justice Services. And so the Office of Criminal Justice Services then basically certifies different law enforcement agencies as they meet competencies or levels. It's kind of like an accreditation for police officers and police departments throughout the state. And so I think, if states are missing that element, like an accreditation, some kind of accreditation, even if it's just through a statewide, entity, and what that looks like, as well as the audit, then there may be the opportunity for them to just kind of skirt that stuff under the rug. But once it is audited, that will come to light. And so that's how you continue to address it.
Can, Dr. Watson, can I throw in one little thing?
Yes, please.
Okay. One of the things there are people I know around the country doing this work around the history, because I think along with what you're asking, I think you have the level where we're doing the audit, or we're weeding out those who are undesirable. But I think there's another piece to it. It's kind of like with healthcare, you have the treatment and you have the prevention. And so one of the things, I don't know, somehow the universities, I think, can play a part, and probably even high schools, in teaching the history. What is the history of police? What is the history of systemic racism? Because some of the people, not that I necessarily feel sorry for anybody, but I mean, the idea that sometimes they're coming out of a training, out of an indoctrination, where they don't even get that there's a problem with it. So we know from history that a group, I think they're called, don't quote me, but I think they're called the Daughters of the Confederate. They sat down and purposely put together, as Chanel was saying, misinformation to support the fact that their brothers and fathers and sons died in the Civil War. And they passed it on and made it required reading. They put a lot of money behind it. So as the years went on, their children and children's children had to read, study, and live up to what was in there. So a lot of these folks, I'm sure, are police now, because it was so they're the ones that put the statues up and all that. So they put a very a whole culture together, and it's everywhere. And so kind of penalizing people at the end point. I mean, you have to kind of do that. But I think if the universities, those of you who are doing this academic work, to really put in their history, going back to the history, look at the Daughters of the Confederate, look at the policing, look at some of Dr. DeGrew's work, and the policeman. I wrote his name down. He actually started something. He has a PhD research. He talked about how they have the history of it, and how it began, and so it's baked in, and so people are acting on what they think are the best practices, really. We may disagree, but so changing that, I think, is with history. Several people are doing work around giving history to people who didn't even know they were racist, and they're finding out it's very effective to give people the facts about how it all started. So that's just a suggestion, but I know universities, and I know all of you are, I'm seeing your PhDs and pre-PhDs and all that, you're all primed to really deliver. They said those who forget their history are doomed to repeat it. Go way, 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 way back into the history of the night riders and those who had to be out there policing, and even the early Black policemen who could not carry guns or were not allowed to arrest white people. They could only kind of walk around and parade and stuff. Go all the way back and bring that into, I said, some of the training. So because some of the young people, men and women, I think if they knew the truth, I think they do differently. Some of them anyway.
I agree. I agree with what you're saying. And as a matter of fact, in the chat earlier, if you scroll up, I put an article in there that I wrote back in 2013, and it focused on the title of it was "The System Isn't Broken; It Was Designed That Way." So basically, what I do is take the readers through the history of policing and the criminal justice system in America, starting from slave patrols to slave codes to Black codes to the anti-lynching laws and the lynching laws and the convict leasing system, and then I go into the Jim Crow laws, because all of this stuff, it just recreates itself. Excellent. Right? So then I get into the Jim Crow laws, and then I get into the war on drugs, and then I get into the extrajudicial killing of Black men and women throughout the United States. So it kind of takes everybody through, a historical past, 400 and plus years in a matter of a couple of pages. But I think that hits on exactly what you're saying, because policing was birthed out of slave patrols, right, where the ultimate goal initially was to to catch runaway slaves, get them back to their plantation, and they did that by any means necessary at the time. And so I think that is critical that people who are currently police officers have a basic foundational knowledge or something of, you're stepping into a system that was birthed out of hatred and racism and bigotry and discrimination. And so understanding that so that way they can be more mindful of how they police. And then, so one of the things that we did was we created it's like a training. It's called The History of Race and Policing in the United States for law enforcement personnel, that sort of takes them through that. And then, but we don't just deal with the history. We also, because I've done trainings on implicit bias and racism and stuff across the country a million times. And it's in how you deliver, because usually when you start to talk to a group of people with that past, that means they've been the perpetuators of slavery and hatred and all that, they start to build up a wall. And they don't want to receive the information. So, we had to come up with a way to, present it in such a way that it doesn't belittle or diminish them. This is what Black people do all the time. So it doesn't belittle or diminish them, but it opens up the door for them to understand how that past impacts how people receive policing, how we perceive policing, and how police officers police today. So great points that you just made.
Excellent. One last little tidbit, because we did do a course, and the way we got around them feeling like we were attacking them, it was their homework. So they came to the table with their own research about that history. And after the class was over, we still get emails of people researching about the history and sending it. And so they didn't, they were able to not have to go in that place, because we didn't push it out. And we're like, okay, here's your homework. And so they brought it back to the table. Thank you so much. That's excellent.
Can I add a little bit to the conversation?
Certainly, Mr. Rogers.
Sure. The only thing I wanted to add, I know as we move forward, we tend to focus a lot on the officers and the people on the front line. I was in law enforcement for about 25 years, and I worked my way up from a buck private ranger clear up to a chief. And I'm hoping that you don't lose sight that you need to focus on the hierarchy. You need to focus on the chiefs. You need to focus on the managers, because many times the cops, they're in the streets, they're being allowed to do the things that they do, and sometimes they're directed to do it. And then we go after them, but the chiefs they still have the same policies. And I know when you talked about how people were trained in the past, I was trained, over 25 years ago. And I can tell you, I was never trained to shoot an unarmed person. That was it was bad. And that kind of stuff has changed. And the police are kind of like a paramilitary group, where they're almost like a gang. Like they have peer pressure, and they pull together and they push them in certain directions. And if a bad apple or bad element isn't rooted out all the way to the top, you're going to have a hard time changing it, because a lot of those officers are either doing what they're told, or they're acting within certain confines when they're saying, I fear for my life, and that's all they have to say. Well, that's what they're going to do. But if you change that standard, then they're going to change your behavior. You hold them accountable to it. So that's all I would add is, as you're doing your studies, as you're moving forward, have some focus on the hierarchy, on the chiefs, the lieutenants, and the people higher up, because I know that when I was very diligent about dealing with the Rangers, they changed. They did change. Their behavior changed. When I left, they went back. But I can tell you, while I was there, as long as they knew I was serious and I was going to hold them accountable, no matter how they felt about who they felt about, they didn't act that way. They stopped.
Thank you so much for that, Mr. Rogers. We agree. I echo everything that you said. I think it will take a top down, bottom up, reaching out to the sides, a holistic approach, really to get to really sort of to change the narrative and to change the practices that we've been reliving and we've been living for too long. And I also want to be considerate of everyone's time and thank our panelists again for such a rich and dynamic presentation, and just offering so much food for thought. And the times that we're living in. It was just a timely conversation and very much needed for the times that we're living in. And I want to call the attention to an initiative that is being pushed forward through State Senator Art Haywood's office, an initiative called Fix the Six. And these are the initiatives that they are focusing on in conjunction with much of the conversation that we've been having tonight, and that has bordered along the series of our community dialogue series. And then thank you. And I would also, I think we may need to, did we skip our community dialogue? We could back up just a tad. There we go. All right. I also want to invite everyone to our next community dialogue, which is examining police power through courts, community, and context. We understand, or we recognize, that dialogue certainly can be a game changer for transforming relationships, strengthening community, bridging real and perceived differences, and stimulating movement toward possibilities that are not previously imagined. And so we're doing that through our continued dialogue series. Please come out and join us if you have time. Next week, same time, same place. Well, almost same place. You would have to register and you would get the Zoom link to participate then, and we can move forward. So we thank everyone for coming out tonight. Should you need an attendance voucher for participating in tonight's dialogue, the link has been dropped in the chat by Zori. And we thank you all for sharing space with us. Thank you again to our brilliant panelists. Continue the march, continue to doing good work and using your platforms. Thank you so much.
Thank you everyone for being here. We really appreciate it.
Everybody.
Thank you. Good job. Great job.
Good night.
Excellent work.